barricaded the area and kept all of these people out of the area. The point is that I don't believe that arrest at that time would have eased the situation at all. I firmly believe that the all-important factor is time in this case, that we're fighting for time. I think we have to be patient and tolerant with both elements if we're going to succeed. I realize that we have a job to perform, but I do believe that we have to be cognizant of community sentiment and feeling.
Breakfast Club is on the air.
Mrs. Gabriel, when did you make up your mind to take Yolanda to school?
Well, I had reached a decision that week, the first week, but I found out that it wasn't final. It wasn't a final decision because after that first week, after the holidays rather, you know, when we had this teachers' convention and Thanksgiving, well, that Monday I was very scared. And I fought with fear. I was so scared, I knew that I had to make this decision with my heart and my conscience. And so I decided to look at everything objectively, not subjectively, but rather as a true Christian had to look at this thing objectively. Not look at it the way the majority would look at it, or not because my environment or my religion or anything had to look at it, but rather because, let's say that because my heart, my conscience told me to look at this thing in the right way. And so that Monday, that Sunday night, the Monday rather, I reached a final decision that what I had to do in all conscience was to take her to school and continue it.
Did you talk it over with her?
We believe it wholeheartedly all the way through that we should go through with it.
Did you think that it might come to this end?
Well, you mean as far as the way things have been happening right now?
Well, that you would have to quit your job and that the neighbors would all ostracize you?
Well, I had an idea that the neighbors would, you know, act the way they have been doing, but as far as my job, well, like I told my wife before, if it meant that I had to take this child, my child Yolanda, out of school or keep my job, I prefer to keep my child in school.
Yolanda, have you enjoyed school these past few days?
Yeah.
And have you been afraid?
No.
Good. Mrs. Gabriel, what eventually decides one to risk all, and were you afraid when you were walking through the crowds?
Had to do, and then I reached my final decision then, and I said, no, what I must do is to take this child to school, regardless.
Mr. Gabriel, I'm sure you must have talked about the possible effects on Yolanda. What did you discuss in that regard?
What is that?
The possible effects on Yolanda of taking her to school.
My wife and I discussed that, but we also came to the conclusion that if things would get so bad for Yolanda that she would come, you know, become sick or anything like that, well, then we'd give her a rest. But we never did come to the conclusion that we would take her out of the school, nor we'd give her a rest maybe a day or so from school, you know, and leave it up to her again. Because all this has been, we've always left it up to Yolanda that she wanted to go to school. And also, like my wife said, we also talked it over with my daughter here, and she said she wants to go to that school. And when she says that school, she meant France.
Do you believe that education is important?
Yes, I really do believe education is very important to any human being.
What sort of a reaction have you had from people?
Well, my faith in the American people has never wavered. And I have had the most wonderful, the most unique reaction to all the letters, because they have been all wonderful, good letters that if I had to walk through that map again, I would sincerely take all these letters in my hand and walk with them, because all these letters are just like so many candles lit. letters from the South, from Louisiana, from Georgia, from all over. And all these people have told me that I am doing the right thing and that they wish, many say, I wish I were there and to walk with you. And so you see, that's the American people as a whole. I have had a few crank letters, and there have been so few, maybe about 3 or 4 out of all the hundreds that I have received.
Mr. Gabriel, what made you resign from your job?
Well, it's mostly the pressure of the fellas not talking to me, not want to have nothing to do with me. I only had one fella actually talk to me, and that was the fellow I worked with. And I believe that was the reason because he's not from Louisiana at all, and he understood the problem more. He understood he understood how I believed about things, and he was open-minded about it.
Did he disagree with you?
No, he never disagreed with me. He never stated his opinion one way or another. He just told me, he says, if that's the way you believe, you're entitled to your belief. In other words, he was open-minded about it all, and he treated me like a human being.
What are you going to do now?
Well, I plan to stay in New Orleans as long as we can. But I have no definite date when I'll leave. But I have been offered jobs in my hometown of Providence, Rhode Island, and also in Chicago. So,
What would you like to do if you could?
in which respects?
As in the way of a job, where would you like to work and live?
Go back to my hometown where I was raised. That's Providence, Rhode Island. Not Providence, actually. There's a little town.
Thank you so much.
Can I ask a question?
Mayor, what did you learn from Wednesday?
Teenagers right out here in the Civic Center with the requests that they march on City Hall. And we saw them gathering. We saw the size of the crowd. We saw the demeanor of the crowd. At that time, they were not misbehaving. They were pretty well in control. The police were there with them. The presence of the police, of course, helped quite a bit. Well, they left here shortly thereafter and proceeded over to the school board office, which is some 4 or 5 blocks away in the financial part of the city, where there are narrow streets and there isn't the room to get into the crowd that we had here. And as you know, over at the school board office, they did get out of hand for a while, and we had to bring in the hose to actually wet the crowd to get them to stand back, because they were disrupting traffic. They were getting beyond what we consider a controlled demonstration.
What happened the next day?
Well, all right. Well, that following night, the Citizens Council had some type of meeting at East Jefferson High School, and they were preparing to come down with a group from Jefferson and do the same thing. But having had the experience of what had happened the day before, we felt that we had permitted the people to do all the demonstrating they should. They had abused somewhat this right to peacefully demonstrate. Nipping this in the bud was important to do and justified, because they had had a day of demonstration. And this was quite disrupting and quite taxing on the police force.
You mentioned the theory of breaking up the leadership.
Well, the funny thing about this was that there didn't seem to be any real leadership. We caught the ones that arrived initially. Evidently, they were the ones who were going to try to organize a second march that particular day, and arrested them immediately and took them into custody. And we found out, oddly enough, of the 45, 39